Last week, we witnessed amazing performances from some great equine athletes at the Breeders' Cup, but we also witnessed great handicapping and wagering from some of the sharpest minds in the sport, including today's guest, whom I'll introduce in just a minute. Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Scattoni, and I am your host for Del Mar Thoroughbred Club's Best Bet Seminar, where I am joined each week by a special guest to discuss the best betting opportunities on Sunday's card. Just a reminder, I say this every week, this is not a traditional selection show. We're not going to talk about every race. We're just going to look at some specific races and wagering strategies that offer the best opportunities to make a decent score. If you're watching live, feel free to leave us a comment or ask us any questions. The show will also be archived on Del Mar's Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube platforms. Now, back to today's guest. He turned a $7,500 bankroll into a winning score of $152,000, taking home a total of more than $540,000 for first place. This year's Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge champion, Matt Miller. Matt, how are you?
All right. Great to be with you, Frank. Hi. All good.
All right. Excellent. Well, that's a pretty incredible feat you did last weekend at the BCBC. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tournament in just a minute. But first, why don't you give us a little background about yourself and how you got interested in the horses? I'm always curious about people's origin stories. So
Yeah. And so I don't know how different this story is going to be from a lot of people. I had a grandpa Mike, and unbeknownst to me as a little kid, at least, he liked to go to the track from time to time. The first time I think I ever went to the races was actually with some high school friends. I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea what was going on. We showed up to a bunch of tents, and I later learned that Arlington had burned down a couple of weeks before.
wow.
And it was an OTB at the time. We were betting some nighttime harness races. So funny that my first trip to Arlington was right after it was destroyed. But once I told Grandpa Mike I was interested, the two of us kept going quite a bit. It was a nice chance for us to get some nice one-on-one time. If I'm being honest, he was terrible. He somehow broke even every time we went.
I've used that line before. I'm not going to lie.
So if he was aware of what was going on now, he would just be shaking his head. I started going to Arlington quite a bit with my own kids. People that have been there before understand the jockey goggle giveaways and all the good stuff they did for families. And so it was a nice chance, being realistic about it. We'd get 2 or 3 races before they'd get bored, but it was a nice chance to go with them. As a player, I'd say I got serious maybe when Pick Six Mania started up. I remember watching with my wife one day. There was $1 million carryover at one of the California tracks, and it attracted just tremendous attention, and that got me interested. I started playing a lot of Pick Sixes at that point and got relatively successful. Not to get too negative, but with the advent of the 20-cent bet,
Yeah.
the hot bet, I've started shying away from those a bit and looking elsewhere. But yeah, that's it for me. And then contest play really picked up with the BCBC. They put on such an unbelievable look. The 2 days of races are unbelievable, but the contest itself is fantastic.
Yeah.
And so I really am a very casual player. It's not an exaggeration when someone asks me, what are you doing next from here? It'll be the NHC probably. I don't really bet in between. I'm not much of an internet or at-home player. And the next set of bets after Arlington is closed might actually be at next year's Breeders' Cup, believe it or not. I'll probably end up doing a trip or two here or there.
Sure.
But that's the kind of player I am.
Yeah, well, you're very selective about your approach and where you want to put your money. So there's nothing wrong with that. Discipline is a huge factor in this game. But let's talk a little bit about your general handicapping approaches. When you and I talked the other day, we talked about how important it is to know your strengths, but it might even be more important to know your weaknesses. Can you explain that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. I look at Breeders' Cup weekend in particular as exposing weaknesses more than anything else. And I'll explain my strategy and my picks. It will all sound so incredibly simple to someone that didn't go through the experience, but we all understand this experience is just littered with landmines, and the trick is to avoid those. I personally don't know how to handicap the European horses.
Mhm.
I'm not great with 2-year-olds. And so, in particular, those races for sure I know I want to skip. We can also talk about on today's card the races that I knew I wanted to skip.
Right.
I'm sure they'll be competitive and good races and all that, but I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at, especially when you get to a big weekend like the Breeders' Cup. But even a big Del Mar weekend card is the same thing. A lot of horses start getting talked about, and it's a lot of the same horses that keep getting talked about. And so, in a strange way, it's almost to my advantage, I feel, to try to close my ears to all that hype, skip the races if I don't really think I know what I'm doing,
Mhm.
just focus in on what I think I do. Now, if I'm being honest, when I go to Arlington on a typical day, I am one of those people that's kind of determined to just play every race because I don't go that often and it's just fun to do that. When I get to the Breeders' Cup, that doesn't work. And
Yeah.
so I am capable of just sitting out races here and there. But I'll admit, if I was at Del Mar today, I would be playing every single
Of
race.
course you would.
Right. I mean, hopefully, I'd be varying the amounts I'd be betting. I do
Sure.
have some opinions that are definitely stronger than others. But yeah, today's card looks terrific.
Well, let me ask you this. So, because in the BCBC, you do have a minimum number of wagers that you have to play. I'm assuming you just kind of play those just to get through and preserve your bankroll. You're not
No,
looking to make a score in those races, or are you? I don't know.
no. And so I respect there are many strategies that can win this thing. So I
Hmm.
don't mean to sound like this is the only way. This way works pretty well for me. I've had decent success with this tournament or on Breeders' Cup Day before. These $600 minimums in the beginning, as a percentage of your bankroll, are a pretty decent sized percentage. And these races, as you know, are darn near impossible to pick. And so the idea, I've heard of people that'll put 600 to show on a favorite in a short field.
Right.
I still think you're taking more risk than you realize with that.
Well,
And so
there's really
for me,
no upside, honestly, right?
well, you protect your $600, and
Right.
when your bankroll's small, that 600 matters because when you have an 8-to-1 shot later on, that $600 is worth $4,800 if you're right. And so while I don't want to lose the 600, I feel like you need to get bang for your buck right away. I
Okay.
have a strategy early on in these tournaments of playing daily doubles. They give you a nice opportunity. They give you a nice opportunity if you can hit the first leg. They allow you to look at leg two much more carefully. If you really like your pick in leg two, maybe you don't need to make a bet. If you're feeling really skittish about it and wish you could go a little deeper, maybe out of that race, you play other horses in the daily double. That's exactly what happened with me at the Breeders' Cup. So I had no strong opinions on day one other than Jack Christopher. It was a little bit of came from left field a little bit to find the horse scratched.
Yeah, he scratched.
It wasn't too tough to pivot, however, because the other horse that I thought was really solid in that race was Corniche, and with the
Hmm.
speed from the rail gone, Corniche emerged to me as a very, very reliable pick.
Yeah.
I bet some daily doubles with Echo Zulu. In the second half, I think I was alive to 2 or 3 horses. It was a huge field. I thought it was absolutely impossible. I played a couple other horses out of that race in the daily double into Corniche, one of which was Pisa Bianca. It was
Nice.
I think it was my 4th pick in the race. So it wasn't exactly a genius selection of looking at this massive field and saying, this is the one.
This is the one.
It was my 4th pick. I was thrilled. It went up at 9-to-1. And look, if I'm being honest, I don't run around betting $600 daily doubles very often. First of all, at
Right.
Arlington, it would obliterate the pool.
Yeah, you
Need,
suck out the value.
yeah, I mean, you need Breeders' Cup money for that. But I'm also not very accustomed to playing in these kind of units. I was pretty stunned to see that a $600 double was paying. Now, it did exceed the win parlay by quite a bit. The double paid 30-something bucks, and so it was an $18,000 hit.
Nice.
What's most significant about that is all of these little $600 minimums now are just kind of annoyances instead of formidable challenges.
Right,
And
right.
so with some bankroll, the $600 as a percentage isn't as big a deal. And now you've got some room to operate, and you've got a lot more flexibility than you realize in terms of the way to bet.
Yeah. Yeah, let's just talk about the double a little bit, because I've said this on the show many times. The double is one of my favorite bets, mostly because you know what you're getting into. You can look at the probables and figure out where the overlays are and which horses are being overbet and try and avoid them. And you can also weight your wagers accordingly. So if you know you want to take a certain amount of money out of a race by using a certain number of horses, you can do that by following the probable. So you and I, when we talked earlier in the week, we talked about finding value. All about this game is finding value and finding your opportunities. Uh, what exactly is your process when it comes to handicapping a race and looking for horses that you want to wager on?
Okay, so for all of the old schoolers out there, this one's for you. I am a traditional daily racing form pen and paper handicapper. It is not that I reject all of the other products or software applications. I'm sure they're great. I do fear a little bit with those that they lead to a degree of groupthink. And if too many people are looking at the same thing,
Yeah.
I'd rather not be looking at it. It's the same theory I have actually around the morning lines. So, Frank, when you generously said, I'll shoot you over a copy of the program for today's races, you remember I said, try to get the early one.
Uh,
I don't want to be tainted by the
sure.
morning. It's impossible not to get tainted when you see 8-5 next to a horse. You almost are inclined to try to like it, or you almost have built-in respect for it that you might not have if you just looked at a clean slate.
Right.
So I start with pen and paper, daily racing form. I kind of create it. This isn't a mathematical approach. I know there are people with a calculator that plug in a certain number of points per race and create an exact line. That's not really my style. I can just kind of, put my finger up to the wind and get a sense for what things are.
Yeah, you kind of intuitively know what the value of a horse should be, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what I do is before I write down the morning lines, I write down my own value lines.
Yeah.
I then look at the issuing of the morning lines as a great opportunity to test where I was. There are races. Yeah, if it was like a contest to pick what you think the morning line would be, sometimes I do pretty well with that. And sometimes there's a lot of variance, and it's the variance that's interesting to me.
Yes.
I think there's a horse that should be really long. The morning line person thinks it should be short. That's a pretty good sign that I missed something. It's probably me, not him. I said this to you before, Frank, and people think I'm being falsely modest, but it's completely sincere. I think I'm about a B- handicapper.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm slightly better than average. I don't think I'm amazing. I think I have too many holes in my game. I'm also not a horseman. And so when I look at the animals on the track and I see that they're frothy or I see their ears are up, I don't know the same signals that other people know to look.
Sure.
So I don't even look. And like I said, I kind of just stick to my method of the form, my value line, and then I'm looking both at, like you said, the daily double probables, and I'm looking at the win odds. And again, depending on the circumstances, if this is the Breeders' Cup, I am perfectly capable of saying there's nothing for me this race. When it's a typical day at Del Mar, I'll find something to play.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, that's good. So the last topic I want to talk about before we actually get into the two races you want to talk about is the actual BCBC. Can you just tell us what your strategy was going into it, how you executed it and actually won the thing?
Sure. It is a very goal-oriented approach. I'm playing to win, period. At least I'm hoping to win. My sense, if you look at prior years and what other champions have done to get their bankroll up there, 125,000 or so is, in my mind, a fair target to set for where you need to finish with your 7,500 that started. That seems so formidable and ridiculous.
It's a high mountain to climb.
But when let's walk it backwards a little bit. And
Mhm.
so we all know that in these big contests, the last race is going to determine the whole thing. I do think you're going to need to hit the classic to win, unless you've hit a total before then that is
Right.
so absurd that no one else can pass.
Yeah.
I don't think that's ever happened before.
No,
Um,
it's usually won in the last race.
exactly. And so I target 125,000. I will take a peek at the leaderboard very occasionally just to make sure no one's above that number yet. But otherwise, I really don't care, who has what. Yes, I guess I'm relieved to see when there's people that are zeroed out. But other than that, I'm really just kind of focused on myself, my own bankroll, and my own goal. My goal is to get to that last race with something in the range of 30 to 35,000.
Okay.
To some degree, that depends on the horse that I want to play. And if I'm in love with a 10-to-1 shot in the last race, I probably need less than that. And I
Right.
probably will therefore expose myself to less risk to get there. But in this particular case, I've known for a month that I was playing Knicks Go.
Yeah.
Uh, that was a clear that it was a clear top horse in the country, in my opinion.
You
And
must have been so happy when he wasn't the favorite. Like, I couldn't believe that he didn't go off favorite in that race.
I was thrilled. And I have to tell you, if it was any other day than Breeders' Cup Day, that would have made me nervous. But when you get to the Breeders' Cup, you can count on every horse, every trainer, every jockey
Yeah.
giving maximum effort. And so I had no concerns at all that him not being the favorite was somehow a signal that he wasn't.
Right.
I knew he was his normal self. And so, right, this was all about the hype created around Medina Spirit being a speed horse and a speed duel that never materialized.
Right. Right.
I didn't buy into that in the first place. And secondly, even if Medina Spirit did send, my personal view was that it wasn't going to matter anyway. I
Right. Nick
still
Go
thought
is just
I
a
had the
better, faster
horse.
horse.
So all I needed in this tournament going in my opinion, was 30 to 35,000 to get to the last race. Working backwards from there, well, actually, we'll go to the back to the beginning because I've already told you that I made 18,000 on day one on that daily double.
Right. The
And
Cornish Daily Double.
and when you add that to the total that I still, I had like 6,000 on the ticket at the time because I was only playing minimums that day.
Okay.
So entering day two, I'm at approximately 25,000 maybe. Again, this sounds so simple, but if your goal is to get to 35 and you're sitting at 25, you could either do that firing away at every single race trying to hit gold, or you can take a very practical approach and say, look, I can actually afford to just make a big bet on a big favorite. And so as I looked at the card, Life is Good to me was one of two horses that looked like a near sure thing on the day.
Yes.
When his race arrived and he showed up at 3 to 5, okay, a little bit of quick math, 25 grand, actually, I think it was 24 at 3 to 5, got me to 40,000. To be clear, I don't bet like this ever.
I was gonna say, what's it like walking up to the machine, putting in a $25,000 bet?
Well, on some level, it was extremely easy to do because it was a clear right move, in my opinion.
Right.
If
Right.
this was any other day, I would volunteer to get my head examined at that point. That's just, I just don't bet those kind of dollars. I don't bet that way on 3 to 5 shots, but I was very focused on what I needed. The
Yeah.
horse won by daylight.
Yeah. It was a good performance.
I don't know that it was an expert job of handicapping. I don't think it took a genius to figure out that Life is Good was going to be a solid play.
Right.
Here's the other thing I'll say about luck. And I know that people like to try to eliminate luck from the equation or pretend it doesn't exist. My other lock on the day was Jackie's Warrior. If Jackie's Warrior had come on the card earlier than Life is Good,
Right. You might have been bust.
almost for sure,
Yeah.
unless the odds were really, really terrible and I thought I could wait out one more race and see if I can get better. But that might have been a landmine that got me. But thankfully, Life is Good hit. And at that point, I know this sounds ridiculous. I came back to my table and I said to my buddies, I'm done. I'm good. Let's just do minimums from here.
Right.
$600 a race. I should be fine. I should have what I need to get to the end. And so maybe not the easiest thing to do at a typical day at Arlington or at Del Mar and just sit there on your hands.
Right.
Breeders' Cup Day, look, especially betting $600 minimums, that's still a reasonable amount of money to bet. And I
Sure.
was still trying to get some action out of those. If I could have scored another $18,000 double, I would have had the luxury of playing another horse in the Classic, maybe.
Right.
Okay, nothing else really materialized. I got to the final race. Uh, if there were 45 minutes between posts, I probably made my bet at minute 40. I mean, I didn't wait till the last I mean, I knew exactly what I was doing.
Right. What you wanted to do. Yeah.
Right.
So when you got to the last race, do you remember what was your value line? You talked about making value lines. What was your value line on Nick's Go?
2.5 to 1, I thought was a fair price. I
Okay.
thought it was a price I was pretty much guaranteed to get. I looked at the daily double probables from the day before. I think there was the Juvenile Classic double, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken.
Right.
I could see right away that Essential Quality was the favorite.
Okay.
Didn't bother me, but what it told me was I'm looking at least 5 to 2 for Nick's Go.
Right.
Funny that I ended up with 3.2 to 1. And so it's not that I failed, but my $125,000 goal, yeah, that extra 0.2 made quite a difference.
Huge.
Betting
Yeah.
dollars like that.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
So yeah. So you end up hitting Nick's Go, and when you put up your 145, did you think you won it, or do you think someone might have done a little better in the last race? What was your feeling after you saw the horse cross the wire?
90%. I
Yeah.
thought I was good to go.
Yeah, that's a pretty big number, 145. So.
This field is filled with some real sharks. Marshall Graham, Jonathan Kinchin, these guys with any money on their bankroll
They're
are
dangerous.
dangerous people. Look, I'd like to think I'm dangerous too with that kind of bankroll. Maybe people think I am now, but certain people with a bankroll that size aren't so scary. There are plenty of people in this tournament that are not capable of seeing it as monopoly money or points or whatever other way you need to think about it to get comfortable with doing this. For me, the entry fee was the price of entering a game, and at that point, this was just a game. It was not real dollars. I do understand it's real.
Right, but to win, you have to have that mentality that it's not, right?
Have to, because otherwise you get so scared. I mean, there's no way I could have done this before.
Yeah, scared money is losing money. So I know we got to get to the races. I'm having so much fun talking about this stuff. I just want one more quick topic because this is applicable to our viewers and listeners today. You talked about having a target for tournament play. What about daily play? Would you recommend a player, even a casual weekend player, to kind of set a target for themselves based on the bankroll they have? Would you give that kind of advice for regular daily play?
I would. And it's funny, this morning with a friend, I did. It sounded to him somewhat outlandish, but I do think you have to ask yourself as a player what you're trying to do.
Right.
If your goal is to go and have a good time, then you should bet in a way that makes it a good time.
Mm-hmm.
If your goal is to make money, I do think you need to get realistic about how to do that. And I think to just show up saying, I'm going to bet like crazy on the horses that I like, and I'm going to make a huge score is a highly unrealistic strategy that usually ends in disaster. And so what I said to my friend, he had 3 horses that he liked on the day, and he had a certain confidence weighting for each of them. And the recommendation I gave is to say, pick your bankroll and pick an amount of money that you'd be happy making. I think the strategy for how to do that is far simpler than just go to the track and try and make a killing freewheel. And so no one wants to feel like they're capping their upside because everybody thinks they're sitting on a 4 or a 5-figure score kind of day. But if you went to the races with $500 and said, I'd feel amazing walking out of here with 1,500, I actually think if you put 1,500 on the target, it would be far easier to hit that than having no target at all and just trying to do your best.
Yeah, just trying to hit a home run or go bust. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. I like having that kind of systematic approach because it also it forces you to really maximize your opinions, right? If you're not spreading around in all the other races where you don't have that strong of an opinion, you can really target in on a couple of opportunities and try and take the most advantage of them. So yeah, no, that's great advice. Well, let's get to the races. I know you wanted to talk about 2 races today, race 7 and 8. We'll start with race 7. I'm going to put that up there. Race 7 is a competitive $40,000 optional claimer. Non-winners are 1 for fillies and mares going 5 furlongs on the turf. The rails are at 0 feet today. The morning line favorite is number 1, Dancing Crane at 5-2, going out for Glatt and Pratt. She's a 3-year-old filly, has speed, and is coming off a March layoff after finishing 3rd with sophomores last time. I did Tom Quigley's seminar on Friday here at Del Mar, and I talked about how much I love Mark Glatt horses sprinting off a layoff. They're almost an automatic bet for me because he usually has them really fired up and ready to go. But I thought there was a lot of speed in this race, so I had a little bit of a tricky time sizing it up. What do you think, Matt?
So I think this looks like a great betting race. And I know people get scared of turf sprints in particular. They think that they're all just kind of random. I actually like turf sprints quite a bit. This one horse, it will not surprise me at all if it wins. I don't think it's a lock or anything like that. I'm also not necessarily sure it's the best of the speed. So for me, my approach, as I said, is I'll go ahead and create a value line. And sometimes that value line does end up looking a lot like the morning line. In this case, it was an exact match on the one horse. And so in my opinion, at 5-2, this is a pretty decent play. I don't think we're going to see 5-2 on this horse. And so pretty quickly, I think we can probably get past it. If this horse is 7-5, 8-5, something much lower than 5-2, I just don't think it's worth it. It may be the most likely winner, but from a value perspective, in the long run, I don't think plays like this are the right play.
Okay.
So for me, my eye went immediately to the 4 horse. I like the fact that it's coming second off a layoff. I recognize it's a turf race. I'm still a fan of buyer speed figures more than anything else. I do think even in turf races, they still matter to a degree. I know that's a bit of a contrarian opinion. And I'm looking at the buyers that this horse has run on the turf at Del Mar. And if she can run anything back close to that, I think this 4's got a solid shot. I'm also very encouraged to see in the back form. Looking at the date, it was in August of 19, but it's a race where the horse didn't need the lead to win.
Right.
Even
she's drawn out outside the other speed, so
exactly. Even if the one just takes off from the rail like we're all expecting, if this 4 horse is sitting on that horse's hip, I'm completely comfortable with that. I think we're going to get pretty solid odds. In my opinion, this should have been the morning line favorite. I had this at 2-1, and so looking at that last race in particular, I do like the fact that it's cutting back now to 5 furlongs. To go out real fast like that and then slow down a little bit at the end coming in 3rd, that didn't really bother me at all. Shortening up, I think, is going to help this horse. It'll be the same with the 1. I see that one ran at 6 furlongs last as well. I also, as I'm looking at the 4, the horse shows up every time. I mean, 8 lifetime starts. I'd like to see more than 1 win, although I understand the nature of the condition of the race, and that's not possible. But this is a horse that shows up every time.
Every eight in the money. 8 starts, 8 in the money, right? Yeah.
Right. And the 3 starts at Del Mar look terrific. So for me, this one is probably the one I am most interested in. If you told me I'm going to get 2-1, I'm probably good with that and done, in terms of looking for other winners. There's a couple horses underneath that I think are interesting. If the entire handicapping world finds this the most convincing analysis they've ever heard, and the horse gets bet down too much, the horse I'd be flipping to is probably the 3. I had this one in my value line at 3-1. I think there's a couple things here that are very, very compelling for this horse. Again, I'm looking at the class of the last 2 races. I don't really mind coming in 7th and 10th in those 2 races at somewhat long odds. Coming back to a condition that this horse is capable of. Right, it ran an absolutely spectacular race in June at Santa Anita. very similar to this, in my opinion.
Right.
And so, right, with those two losses, I think those two recent losses are going to help the odds quite a bit. I'm also looking at the horses that beat this horse in those races. Those are solid horses. So I like the 3. I think it's versatile. And if we can get anything close to 6-1, I would take that in a heartbeat. I would take anything above 3-1. So this could be one of those strange races where maybe I even have more than one horse going. That's possible.
That's what I was going to ask. Would you ever do a double win bet, or would you just play your horses in doubles?
I try not to bet 2 horses to win.
Yeah.
I mean, your odds, when you factor
against
on the other one, your odds get kind of bad kind of quickly. So my strategy in a race like this would probably be to keep my eye on the 3 and the 4, to play to win the one that I find to be more convincing. There's also a couple of verticals here that we'll talk about that I like. But I could also see taking the other one of the 3 and 4 and maybe playing a huge double into the next race or into this race from the prior. So yes, I don't love making 2 win bets if I can help it.
Sure.
Leverage you get from a daily double helps with that to a degree.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, why don't you just mention the other horses you would use in your exotics, and then we'll move on to the 8th race.
Sure. So the 2 in the exotics are the 2 and the 7. So focusing on the 2 first, again, 1 for 17. I'm not interested in this horse to win. And my morning, my value line was quite high on this horse only because I'm assessing win odds for that purpose. But this horse is otherwise, there's 6 seconds and 4 thirds out of 17 starts. And just look at these the string of races this horse has run are pretty incredible. And 2nd and 3rd pretty consistently. So the horse seems well placed at this level. And, to look at a 4-2 exacta, a 3-2 exacta, even trifectas with the 2 underneath for 3rd. You can talk about who else I'd plug in the 2nd spot. I think those could pay pretty decently. Even if you don't like my pick of the 4 and stick with the favorite with the 1, even the 1-2 exacta, I think here should pay pretty well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Sure.
The 7 horse, I'm liking the fact that it's done very well at Del Mar. I like the fact that it's a closer. I'm really impressed with how well it closed in that last race in particular. And for a horse that's 8-1 morning line, I don't think for purposes of playing underneath, it's going to be anywhere near that high. And so my strategy here, depending on win odds, I'm looking to play the 3 and the 4 to win or in daily doubles. And I could see pairing them up with the 2 and the 7 underneath. That's at least what I'm thinking now. I think we have to see what the odds look like. If the odds on the 3 horse end up being much lower than I'm expecting, okay, maybe I pass on that one and just stick with the 4, something like that.
Okay. No, that's a great way to approach that race. And you mentioned about maybe playing some daily doubles in the race before to that leg, and then maybe in that leg to the 8th race. So let's talk a little bit about the 8th race. It's the $100,000 Bob Hope Grade 3, 7 furlong sprint for 2-year-olds. There were 5 entered, but Rock and Rye was a program scratch, so we are down to 4 horses. 3 of them trained by Bob Baffert, including the morning line favorite, number 3, Winning Map at 7-5. He was 40 cents on the dollar in his debut. He made the lead, never looked back. He draws outside his other speedy stablemates, so he should have every advantage against them. The lone non-Baffert runner is number 5, Forbidden Kingdom for Richard Mandela. Can King Richard slay the 3-headed dragon? Matt?
I think so.
Yeah.
So again, consistent with what I've been saying, I've created a value line for the race. The reason I wanted to talk about this race is almost to argue with everybody who looks at a 4-horse race and says, this isn't a good betting race.
Right.
I recognize the exacta is going to pay very little. Although if you hit it directly, you'll do pretty well. I like a race like this with 4 solid competitors because I still think in the daily double, you can get value out of this race. I don't think this is a race where you can spread. So I do think you probably have to just take one and hit it.
Yes.
But I think for daily double purposes, this should give you a little bit of extra leverage, especially if you're playing a shorter price horse than the last. I wouldn't hesitate to fire into a daily double here. For me, this is a killer race. I mean, these are all solid horses.
Really good horses.
Every one of them was quite a pretty penny was paid for these. I do think the Mandela horse is quite interesting. The reason I like that one in particular, I'm going to draw a line through that last race.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, it was on the turf. Second of all, he lost to a really, really formidable horse that ended up in the Breeders' Cup. And so to lose to one timer in a turf race by not too much, look, I excuse that. I mean, it's not that it was such a bad performance, but I just kind of excuse that. And when you draw a line through that race, this one all of a sudden looks just like all the others, in my opinion. Those buyers are within a standard deviation or so of each other. And so, okay, I do think not being a Baffert horse, you're going to get a premium on the 5. So
yeah, did you hang a value line on the 5?
So I did my value line before the scratch of the 4, which I don't really think changed anything.
Yeah.
That was kind of the only horse I was prepared to eliminate. So I had a value line of 4 to 1. I think realistically it'll end up closer to 3.5 or 3. That might not be a bad pick here, especially in daily doubles. The other thing I would do in the last race, as I'm looking at the daily doubles in this race, is I would look at probables. And if you see one of these Baffert horses getting played harder than the others, yeah, I tend to believe that the people betting these doubles know what they're doing. And that might be a good clue as to who's going to show up in this race as well. I don't love gravitating towards the favorite, but if you told me that the 1 was paying a third the price of the 3 horse in the doubles, that would spook me quite a bit on the 3, because I think they should be much closer in odds than that.
Yeah, I think the 1 actually is going to take a significant amount of money in this race. This is kind of a hype horse. I know Baffert's really, really high on this horse. And, that last race was super impressive. So I do think that horse is probably going to go off favored. I don't know what your value line was, but breaking from the rail at 7 furlongs, even in a short field, is never an easy thing, right? Because you have that gap and sometimes they break in and it could get a little messy.
Sometimes they break in. I actually think the fact that Baffert trains all 3 of them is going to be a bit helpful.
Sure.
I don't really believe that in these sorts of races there are team tactics or anything like that. But I do think it is unlikely that these jockeys are going to go on suicide missions against each other when working for the same train.
Team, yeah, of course.
So I do think each is going to get to kind of run its race without getting messed with too hard. My value line on the 1 was 4 to 5. And right now I would be pounding away at that thing.
That's kind of what I think. I think that horse is going to take money. Of all the 3 Bafferts, that's the one who's going to go off as favorite. But what was your value line on the 3? Because that's the morning line favorite.
The value line on the 3 was exactly 7 to 5. And so that is the morning line by coincidence. And so we might get that. I don't think we're going to get both 4 to 5 and 7 to 5. I'm not at all worried about there being all sorts of value to be found in this race. The 2 horses, the one, out of the 3, it was kind of my least favorite. I had that one at 2 to 1. So I had these 3 pretty tight. But again, I could see, especially if you can hit a nice pick in the prior race and hit the double cold into this race, I do think this is a playable race. And like I said, my expectation is I think the 1 is going to get bet quite hard. You might get 4 to 5. And if you do, I would probably grab it. I would hope otherwise to be looking towards the 5, and hopefully you'll get 4 to 1 there.
Yeah. I like the fact that you brought up this race because, like you said, most people would just look at it and pass it, and yet you see an opportunity. It reminds me a lot of my good friend Leo, who's very similar. Like he's looking at things differently than most people. Yesterday there was a 3 to 5 Baffert, who looked like couldn't lose and didn't lose, And yet Leo somehow turned that 3 to 5 shot into a 7 to 1 when he just cold decked the exacta. And if you can do that, I mean, you take 7 to 1 on a very, very likely outcome, you're doing okay.
Absolutely. You know, it reminds me of a time I remember there being a race where it was a harness race with a 1 to 9 shot, and every other horse in the race was 100 to 1. I don't remember what the order was, but the 1 to 9 shot won.
Yeah.
A couple of 100 to 1 shots came in second and third, and the trifecta paid terrible, and no one could understand why. The reality is, it may be 100 to 1 to win, but the odds of coming in second or third are wildly different than that. And so, right, to be able to find an exact in this race, a 1-3 or a 1-5, if this one is even going off at 3 to 5, you still might find 3 or 4 or 5 to 1 in the exacta here.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I would take that.
If you could just lock that and crush it, you do all right. All right. Well, I know you have to go. I have to go. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us and share your, not only your tournament strategy, but your general handicapping philosophies. And, you know, just congratulations. I know you've had a busy week. A lot of people wanted your time, and I really thank you for spending time with us to talk about these Del Mar races, Matt.
I think this is probably the official end of my 15 minutes of fame. So
your victory lap.
Great way to do it. Thank you.
All right. And to everyone out there watching, thank you. As I always like to say, good luck to us, and let's make some money. I will see everybody next week for the next edition of Best Bets. Thanks, everyone.